something really special. We hope you enjoy the day throughout. It's going to be great. Just before I open the show today, I'd like to express my thanks to Tony and all the boys and girls of the Tank Museum who spent many hours in preparing for this weekend. It is the best and only armoured show in the world, and our thanks to Richard.
If I stand behind them, I get a good view.
Shock and awe! Like the 432, the armoured personnel carrier that the British Army has put into service back in the 60s. It's basically the same vehicle, but instead of a troop with a crane there is so that REME, Royal Electrical Mechanical Engineers, could follow around things like Chieftain on the battlefield, and that crane and that space on the rear was big enough so they could put a pack in it and be able to put a new... It's a lightweight version of a recovery and a repair vehicle. So 434 that was called, it's part of a family of vehicles that were based on that same chassis. 434 had a crew of 4. Now we're looking at some of the armoured recovery vehicles coming on now. The first one is a Sente RV, and part of that worthy family, the Centurion family of tanks, designed for the British Army way back in 1945. They started making the recovery vehicle, followed by the Challenger farm. Now the farm is Challenger on with their other vehicle, that's the one facing Steve carry spare towing chains, all sorts of material in the side there, pickaxes, shovels, bolts, and there's some form of armour protection. And it meant early in the war a lot of Tiger tanks were actually lost or destroyed by their own crews because there wasn't a way of recovering them safely. Inevitably in the future, armoured vehicles are going to be used more and more in an urban environment, and urban environments get cluttered with big furniture, all sorts of things that are going to have to be removed. And Challenger 2 as a main battle tank has got a fit and fire now. Again, armoured is really important because you're able to be able to actually manoeuvre a big heavy vehicle and get it through urban areas, and that means those
cavalry regiments, and is used for tasks such as reconnaissance, rapid assault and fire support. It has the capacity to support itself and its crew of 3 for more than 800 kilometers. Maximum speed of 18 miles an hour on roads or 55 miles over rough terrain. It is a high mobility weapons platform with a unique suspension system which allows rapid movement across varying terrain. Jackal 2 is armed with a general purpose machine gun for crew protection and can carry either a heavy machine gun or a grenade machine gun as the main weapon system in the fire support role. This Jackal is commanded by Corporal Roos and driven by Mr. Joynes of the Armoured Trials Development Unit based here in Bovington, with Sergeant Walker manning the heavy machine gun. It is used by the 3 regiments based in Catterick, and it is highly mobile. Entering the arena now, the Scimitar 2. This vehicle carries a 30mm rod cannon and a 7.62mm coaxially mounted machine gun for self-defense. It is used by armoured cavalry regiments of the Royal Armoured Corps and the close reconnaissance troops and platoons of the armoured and armoured infantry battle groups. The Scimitar 2 and the CVRT fleet will be succeeded by the new Ajax family of vehicles, which are due to start their trials here in Bovington in 2017. The Scimitar 2 on display is commanded by Mr. Dennis and driven by Lance Corporal Betts. Both are members of the Armoured Trials and Development Unit. Two vehicles are part of the lead cavalry battle group is some distance in front of the main body and will provide early warning of enemy activity. The recce group hears tracked vehicle noise in the distance, and it is assessed that it is getting closer. Meter number 10 bridge, which is capable of supporting an armoured and battle-ready Challenger 2 main battle tank. Titan is an armoured engineer vehicle designed to enable troops and vehicles to cross maps of up to 60 metres by aiding the selection of close support bridges. Along with training, currently Terrier, which you see coming onto the ground of their choosing. The Terrier Armoured Digger is the Army's most advanced engineering vehicle. Despite weighing 30 tons, Terrier is an agile and personality superior. It is fitted with firewall cameras and thermal imaging technology, providing solely with a 360-degree surveillance capability that can be used day and night. The technology used in Terrier is so advanced that the vehicle can be operated by remote control high-velocity missile system. Longer than the standard CBRT chassis, Stormer has 8 rounds of Star Street missiles ready to fire, with a further 12 missiles carried to the arm. Stormer is fitted with a roof-mounted air defense alerting device, or ADAD. The ADAD's infrared scanner and processor provide target detection and prioritization, and the system automatically slews the weapon sight onto the designed to counter threats from very high performance, low-flying aircraft and fast pop-up strikes by anyone. The missile, which travels in more than 3 times the speed of sound, uses a system of 3 dart-like projectiles, allowing multiple hits on the target. The HVM can be fired from the shoulder, from a lightweight multiple launcher, or from the vehicle you see here, the Stormer AFV. This vehicle is commanded by Sergeant Pollard and driven by Sergeant Waterman, both of the Combat Support Wing of the AFV Driving and Maintenance School. And now for the AS-90. The AS-90 artillery is fitted with this 155mm 39 caliber shotgun. 261 kg of high explosive onto a single target in less than 10 seconds. An automated loading system enables the gun to fire with a burst rate of 3 rounds in fewer than 10 seconds, an intense rate of 6 rounds a minute for 3 minutes, and a sustained rate of 2 rounds a minute. The gun is equipped with a recoil and hydro gas suspension system, which allows the turret to traverse. This AS-90 is commanded by Sergeant Henry and driven by Sergeant Mace. Once again, both the members of the Combat Support School here in Bovington. AS-90 is grouped into batteries of 4 to 6 guns, an artillery movement area, or AMA. The Stormer is part of a layered air defense system, and its primary target will be attack helicopters and ground attack aircraft flying at low level. An armoured recce call sign has just requested the battery to conduct an emergency or danger close fire mission, as they assess they may be overrun by enemy armour and infantry. Danger close is the term used when friendly call signs are inside the danger area of a fire mission. The AS-90 is into action and has fired.
My location is Rin, Sierra Uniform 798-471.
On the Challenger 1 main battle tank chassis. Instead of armaments, this vehicle is fitted with a powerful wing, front mounted dozer blade, single 7.62mm GPMG, which is operated by the commander. The craft can also provide maintenance service or tow stricken vehicles, as in this case, to assembly points or maintenance units. Such vehicles operate overhauled facilities. The craft on display is commanded by Corporal Harkness and driven by Corporal George, and both are members of the REMI section of the Armoured Trials and Development Unit. So whilst the craft begins its manoeuvring to recover the stricken AS-90, coming in now is the Warrior 513. Warrior variants include Artillery Observation Post Vehicle, OPV, Command Repair Vehicle. All variants are equipped with a 7.62mm gun. This Warrior 513 is operated by Navy personnel from both armoured and combat infantry battle groups. It is equipped with a 20-ton winch, a 6.5-ton crane plus power tools, and is able to turn trailer carrying two Warrior by Lance Corporal Blue, as both are members of the REMI section of the 18DU here in Bovington. AS-90, and it is worth noting that both the Armoured Squadron and Armoured Infantry companies have Warrior repair and recovery vehicles in their fitter section. This Warrior 513 will now provide instrument protection to the car as it extracts the AS-90. So, ladies and gentlemen, the craft has to manoeuvre very carefully. It's obviously a dangerous place for the recovery team to be. And they need to get the craft perfectly aligned with the wishbones in order to connect them. And then they will depart from the arena. shortly to welcome into the arena the Challenger 2 TES and the Warrior 510 TES for the final part of the British Army Display 2016. 5% of Challenger 2 components are interchangeable with its predecessor, the Challenger 1. It has had more than 150 major modifications, including a completely new turret, and the L-30 120mm gun and second generation solid armor. Station, which is fitted with a 7.62mm GPMG. The British Army currently has 3 armoured regiments, each equipped with 56 Challenger 2s, organised into 3 squadrons of 18 tanks, with 2 tanks in the commanding officer's tactical headquarters. This platform is the theatre entry standard platform, known locally as Megatron, and is being driven tonight by Corporal Buck, who is a part of the trials troop of the Armoured Trials Development Unit. The Warrior family of armoured vehicles entered service in 1988 and has been Bosnia and Afghanistan. They provide mobility and survivability for the infantry and enable key elements for the Royal Artillery and Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers to operate effectively within the battle group. Warrior can be fitted with enhanced armour and is continuously being updated. The version in front of you that will defeat light armoured vehicles out to a range of 1,500 metres. The Warrior 510-10 is on display today, is commanded by Corporal Duck, driven by Fusilier Groves and Corporal Vehicle Section of the 18th. It is shortly before HR, and the Armoured Squadron Company Group are about to launch from their forming up point, and the fire plan is being executed. The battle group CO counts down to HR.
Charlie 1, this is Zero Alpha. HR is 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go, go, go.
The assault tanks bypass the enemy objective and form a ring of steel to isolate it from reinforcement. The intimate support tanks, which you see here, lead the armoured infantry onto the objective. An enemy trench has been identified. Infantry platoon commander who tasked the section to clear it.
India 131 Alpha, this is Tango 12 Alpha. This my good fellow, at 50 meters, enemy trench with 2 tanks at a distance. I am suppressing approach from the north. Over. India 31 Alpha, Roger, Alpha.
The CR2 provides overwatch to the infantry section and their warriors as they commence their assault. You can see how close the warrior gets to the enemy trench before dismounting in section. This is deliberate and ensures the dismounts spend the least amount of time as possible in the open. Once the fire trench has been cleared, the section will remount in their warrior as soon as possible and prepare to be tasked to clear another position.
Hello, India 31 Alpha, this is 031 Charlie. Position clear, over. India 31 Alpha, Roger. Depth position identified by Tango coordinate. Move now to grid. Sierra Yankee 835 672. Over. Roger, moving now. Out.
So, ladies. And please stand to greet these serving soldiers as they complete a parade lap on this, the Armed Forces Day 2016. systems does the same task that the Mark IV did 100 years ago. And we'll wait for the Mark IV to make its stately progress before I introduce you to I have mentioned several times throughout the day that leaving of unattended bags is not a good idea. We've just had a bag left, hence we had to clear people back. Ladies and gentlemen, I cannot stress enough the importance of not leaving any bags unattended anywhere. Please retain your bags at all times.
Now if you go right back and you look at something like the suspension, on the Mark IV, on all First World War tanks for instance, they never had any working suspension at all. The rollers that run under the track or on the track are actually on spindles pushed through the hull, and they serve for keeping the tank going, but they don't have any springs, so they can't be called suspension. On Challenger 2, you've got the late hydrogas suspension, well sprung. Now connected with that is the way the tracks are adjusted. It doesn't seem like it. I think, frankly, it's normally something we don't discuss. But really, even a track will stretch. After you've run for so many miles, you need to adjust the tension of the track, and you do that by adjusting the idler. If you look at the Mark IV, you'll see there's a big nut at the front, and by releasing that, the wheel becomes loose. Gradually move it forward. On Challenger 2, that's all done from the driver's seat. He operates it hydraulically, and he can adjust the tension of the track by taking it up or loosening it off as he wants to. And it does make another difference as well, because when they're driving on hard surfaces, they can make the suspension a bit softer by loosening the idler wheel. If on the other hand they're driving across country, they want to tighten it up, they push the idler wheel forwards a wee bit, and it tightens up the track just enough to give the thing a reasonable ride across country, and that does make a difference. But they haven't been able to do that well, even into the Second World War. You still had to adjust the track physically out from outside. This is one of the first tanks in which you can actually do the whole thing from sitting in it. Now if we go up above that, we can look at maybe the armour next. The Mark IV has about 10-12 millimetres of armour plate. It's adequate. It would keep out rifle fire, machine gun fire, and hand grenades going off nearby. But it wouldn't stop a shell from a field gun. If that hit the tank, it was demolished. So that was the way they were doing things in the First World War. Now Challenger 2 has armour. They won't tell us how thick it is, but it's proof against almost anything. And it's Dorchester 2, it's the latest version of Chobham armour, and it means that you can fire different projectiles at the tank and it can cope with them. In fact, the only occasion when a Challenger 2 has been knocked out was on happened in the Gulf War. It was a blue-on-blue incident when one Challenger loosed off at another. They did it thinking the second one was a Russian tank, and when they hit it, they found that they could knock it out easily. But the trouble was, of course, it was one of ours, and it didn't do it any good at all. One of the others, another Challenger 2, was hit in the Gulf, by an RPG-7, which is a rifle-propelled grenade fired at low angle, and it hit the tank underneath. And there, where the tank's more thinly armoured, it did actually blast through and injured the driver. He managed to get the tank out to action and before he collapsed. And that shows you just how strong a tank is today, because really the idea of the wounded man, the body bag and that sort of thing is not really acceptable anymore. They want tanks that will survive, and that's what Challenger 2 has got. Now you'll also notice Challenger 2 in this case is fitted with a fabric cover, and it's a thing done by Rheinmetall in Germany, and it's known as I've forgotten what it is known as, and I'll tell you that. It's a device for keeping the internal heat inside. One of the problems of the tank now is the way they give away their presence by heat. It's called a thermal signature, and those jackets are insulated on the inside so that any heat or anything like that that builds up can be controlled quite adequately by the jacket on it. And it also means that the tank is less of a radar object, because the fabric of that jacket fits curvedly over the angular parts of the tank and makes more of a blob of it. The tank, it has a cannon on each side and a sponson, but that cannon's only a 57mm weapon. It's not really a big gun by any standards, although it has a range of about 4 kilometres. You really are fighting at a much closer range than that. Now, Challenger 2 has got a 120mm rifled gun, which has an amazing range. In fact, in the Gulf again, a British tank knocked out an enemy tank at over 4 kilometres by firing one of these rounds of these armour-piercing ammunition. And that's what makes the difference. Now, the British are probably the only people who still use rifled guns. The Leopard 2, which you saw going round earlier, has a smoothbore 120mm. That's about the main thing. I can talk about other details, the tracks and so on, but basically the only thing that hasn't really changed are the men. Now, we've got a few minutes there. Since I've probably talked about the tanks, I thought maybe
front of the turret, around its 120mm gun. 3 guys in the turret, commander, gunner and loader, and it was fitted to the front of the turrets and a small area around just above the driver's head to add to the level of that with a rather jazzy looking camouflage scheme on. That's a design as a vehicle that was going to Iran. Again designed up at Chertsey in the 1960s. It's a exactly what's in there, and they sandwich it together and they put it in 1984. They're really a design concept. Royal Ordnance took over the design parentage from Chertsey, and they ended up again, the vehicles were made at Leeds, and the vehicles it had a number of tipping points that actually performed very well in the Gulf War when We've actually tank to a 3-ton scout car in the front there, Daimler Dingo, whizzing round in the sandy colour there. An absolute superb design. Engine in the back, straight 6 petrol engine, 2 guys in the front, about an inch of armour plate to stop a bullet in the front there, and off you went and found the enemy. You had speed in that vehicle. You could whip around the battlefield up to about 55 miles an hour, and you actually had a fluid flywheel that meant you could whip into reverse and go just as fast backwards as you could forward. They gave it a turret with a 30 caliber Browning machine gun in as well, and that was in service to the British Army till after the First Gulf War. Again, came out of service because it had a petrol engine in the back, and the British Army decided to go for diesel. Behind the Ferret we got Saladin, slightly bigger vehicle, different way of doing reconnaissance, because with a vehicle like that you've got a bigger gun on it. That's a low pressure 76mm gun. And the idea there is that you can wake the enemy up a little bit with your presence, as well as just by using a vehicle for stealth. They're very, very effective vehicle. And again, another one of those vehicles where it's got a bow-shaped hull. So when it goes 2 vehicles behind, we're looking at a Scorpion, this CVRT family, and behind that, aluminium, nice and light. They got them moving, speedy. They wanted them to be light because they wanted them to be air portable. 2 of these vehicles could fit in a Hercules and be transported anywhere around the world. 76mm low pressure gun on it. The gun behind on the Scimitar is a 30mm Raden cannon. Started life trying to be an anti-aircraft weapon, and they ended up realising it got a greater anti-armour capability. Those vehicles were used for reconnaissance in the British Army. Behind them, we've got a couple of American M3 half-tracks, which have an interesting life. They were first designed, used as APCs, used as vehicles to knock out tanks as well. They put a 75mm gun on the back, and at times, amazingly, was also used for reconnaissance. Vehicles the Americans made in the Second World War. We've also got driving around the museum's M16 version of the half-track with those 50 caliber machine guns on the back. Driving around just in front, you may be able to pick it out, in front of the Dingo, another one of these vehicles that was used for scouting, made it shorter, put the engine in the back, but what they were doing again is using tried and tested components. And that was used as a reconnaissance vehicle, again, tracked. Always the argument, do you use wheels or tracks for reconnaissance? Tracks can go to more places than wheels can get to, but tend to be noisier. And there's often a debate in military circles, should you have one of each? At one time, when the British Army had the Scorpion in service, we also, at the same time, had the Fox wheeled reconnaissance vehicle. So an impressive display there of lighter weight, some armoured, some not vehicles driving around. You may pick up, there's a Kubelwagen amongst them. That's a privately owned vehicle that's here today. Kubelwagen, very different type of vehicle, of course. It was Hitler's mate. He designed the car, the VW People's Car. As war was looming, he was asked by for all sorts of roles for the Wehrmacht, and it's a very successful design, although the FE or Fighting Vehicle 432, and both those vehicles were providing the same role for different armies. The M113, it's now the most numerously made armoured vehicle of all time. An awful lot of M1. Driver in the front, sits next to the engine, and you can get 11 soldiers in the back. And there's a nice big square door, the Mowag trap. And back in about 1978, the South Africans were trying to design a vehicle in their counterinsurgency campaigns that would protect infantry carried behind, and that's why it's so high up. So if it drove over a mine, the guys in the back would be safe from the mine blast. and they'd actually have to enter that rear compartment by climbing up over the top. It doesn't have a door at all. And again, very sensibly, they built the Bufal on components that at the time with sanctions South Africa was going to be able to get hold of. So lots of simple engineered, simple truck components to be able to build that one. Now behind the Bufal are the walkway missiles behind it. That's basically it's a couple truck that they put armour plate on and then gave it the Malakara missile system. Malakara had been developed out in Australia. Pounds of explosive on the end on a hollow charge missile, and that was enough to pretty much blow up any tank at the time. They used it on 2 spare missiles that carried in pods. And the idea for that vehicle, it could be dropped out of a Beverly aircraft with a cluster of parachutes, land and support airborne troops. So the badge on the side is actually from the parachute squad, and these vehicles would splatter all over the place. So they parachuted separately, would marry up with the vehicles, and it gave airborne troops just a little bit of armour protection and the capability of taking on tanks if you were brave enough. Now Malakara was supposedly effective out to about 4,000 metres. The honest truth though is it took a lot of missile on its time to recognise. I think behind the Kara vehicle, the Hora vehicle, Stalwart was part of a family of vehicles, all with those 6 wheels. And again, we've seen one already, the Saladin, the armoured personnel, the armoured car, a little bit earlier on. The idea of the 6 wheels, same drivetrain. This one is a load carrier, and the idea of Stalwart was that it was amphibious load carrier, so it could cross rivers or streams or lakes. If the bridges had been blown up, you could put your, and it was amphibious, and it could actually head across quite a bit of water to get those supplies forward. Could carry up to 5 tons of salt to bring, up to another 10 tons behind it. And as they look like they're going on, I'm going to finish off with that last weird wonderful thing. That's called, we often call it the Tupperware tank here. It's another one of these design concept vehicles. It's a vehicle that was put together, its technical title is Advanced Finished Plane with the vehicle. We actually got it here for the museum. We paid the princely price of £1. Plastics are holding up in the framework and see what the development potential is. There's an awful lot of power behind it because they can actually do that vehicle the speed, get to the fighting as quickly as possible, and then back off. Use your fire. Or a T-55 Russian tank, the first one. In actual fact, it's a Chinese copy. What happened after the Sino-Soviet pact, the Russians gave the plans of their T-54 tank to China, and that becomes what then called a Type 59 tank. Now it's 9 similarities before they started actually putting diesel onto their hot exhaust, and what that does, it creates that smoke and therefore make the tank smaller. And this works on a cassette system. Think of a cassette like on a projector with all the slides in. Instead of slides, it's got ammunition in, and it turns around, and an automatic ram pushes that round into the like that. It means you can save the space of that crew member, and then we've ended up getting together there with a smaller, lower profile tank with the T-72. Now T-72, 125mm gun, it could fire armour-piercing rounds, it could also fire missiles, and that extended the range that those tanks could fire from. Now this particular T-72 was done as an exchange with Poland fairly recently. We gave them, a few years ago, we gave them a Chieftain tank, and we ended up with this T-72 back. And interestingly, it's been going up to Salisbury Plain, as armour is, of course, yet again, I'm afraid to say, around the world, a bit of a threat. A couple of the vehicles coming on that may have been fighting, if the Cold War had gone hot, against those types of T-tanks there, or type tanks. First one that we're going around is the American M60 vehicle. Now, the American tanks after the Second World War went through an evolutionary process. There was the M48, basically on a very similar design, was enlarged with bigger guns and thicker armour, but the overall shape step up from the earlier M47, M48 tanks. And you can see above the barrel there's a massive white light searchlight. And again, a vehicle like that, again for night firing. This is before we had regular use of infrared, so you had a night light. It's basically a searchlight to be able to allow the vehicle to pick on a target and fire. The British gun, the 105, that was the gun that we put on the Centurion tank after its earlier version with a 20-pounder, and it was sold and it was put on the early versions of the Leopard tank as well. Now, the other vehicle is not a tank, and again, just trying to work out all the definitions. Just because it's got tracks and a big gun on doesn't make it a tank. The other vehicle is a piece of what's called self-propelled artillery, and that's a whopping great big 8-inch howitzer, or in American parlance 203mm gun, that's been placed on an armoured hull. And the idea, when you want to fire a gun like that, you anchor the ground anchor that's on the rear of the vehicle in the ground. That gun order with Syria at the moment, and it was passed on. And because, again, with American industrial might, it means that there's a lot of the tanks were made, and also a lot of spare parts. Into service all around the world because those parts are available. And fairly recently, we were very conscious in service. There wasn't so much got two here at mobile. The Type 59, that gun on there is not a standard gun. It's actually a British gun that was put on an example of the Type 59. So, see, it also had British smoke discharges put on the vehicle. Again, I don't think any countries ended up buying the British 105 to upgrade their Chinese Type 59 tanks. The other interesting thing, because the Chinese made, and that's so that because they thought it was the most common language for the export market, so they sold it to the Middle East, to Africa, quite a number of countries bought Chinese. Famously, the Type 59 is the tank you saw in Tiananmen Square, famous photograph of them lined up with one protester standing in front of it. T-72 creating his smoke screen again, giving a bit of atmosphere to the side, again as that tank comes towards the hit. And again, diesel engine in the rear, those racks on the back around fuel. 3-man crew as opposed to 4-man in most of the Western tanks. And again, the Soviet army, they insist for what they call the 95% percentile, in other words, 90%. The Russians did it very simply. They did it in another direction. They said you can only be 30,000 T-72s have been made, so they're still they're all in service around the world. And those little bits on the side, that's called gill armour. They can actually turn that just above the tracks and the wheels. They can angle that forward. The idea is if you're firing something like a rocket propelled grenade, in other words, a hollow charged weapon at the vehicle, by extending that armour, you might detonate it away from the vehicle before it hits main components like the wheels or the hull. And if you can detonate an RPG, put out a specification. We wanted a very cheap vehicle, an infantry tank they wanted to call it, and the idea was they wanted a vehicle to support the infantry and tackle prepared positions. So think like trenches in the First World War. that many of them, and even as they first went into service, they'd already started designing a types. Diesel tends to be harder to set on fire, but the problem is on the battlefield, if you've got different engine types, you've got different fuel types, you've always got the risk that we've got with a family car, putting the wrong type of fuel in the wrong engine. And that's a real problem for the military, is just making... Now we're going to bring on a tank that's got a wonderful engine note to it. Those of you realise this is the bit of a back seat, because we knew aircraft were vitally, really very, very powerful. Certainly with that Centurion, it was 105 gun, that can fire a range of different ammunition types. High explosive, smoke, canister, which is basically lots of almost like ball bearings being fired, 5mm gun. We saw earlier in 39, only 6 years before the Centurion, or 5 years before the Centurion was designed, that Matilda 1 tank just had one machine gun on it. It could carry a 303 machine gun or a 50 caliber Browning or Vickers. Add armour, you've got to add firepower to defeat the armour, you make the tank slower. And that debate still goes on to this day. How much firepower do we need, how much protection, and how much mobility? And again, we saw with the British Army this morning, Challenger 2, fantastic levels of cookers, and one phrase that was used. Actually, they were a brilliant answer to a problem by the American automotive industry. And the tanks coming on in the front of the Shermans, we've got, first of all, they're an M5 Stuart tank, followed by an M3, an American automotive design. The idea was, in the 1930s, the Americans that was going to test things. And the American war plan was, if war came, we will throw resources at the problem. And that's exactly what the Americans in the 1930s. And when war came, America in 1939 had only made about 380 tanks in its own country. By the end of the war, they'd made over 68,000 vehicles. And that was an amazingly quick ramping up of production. Now with the M3 Stuart tank, that's a sandy coloured tank, that's in British markings, because it's a really lovely tank. And that name sticks, so in British service, we call it the Honey tank. It's upgraded in American service. They make another better version called the M5, and that's the one that's in front of it. The M5 changes the hatches to going on the top of the front, the glacé plate, instead of being open looking forward. They add armour on the side of the turret. You can see there's some spaced armour on the side. It was supposed to be improvement. They added the armour protection, but they didn't upgun it. And that was one of the criticisms. That 37mm gun, by the time they're using it from 1943 onwards, it's starting to not have much effect on the battlefield. And in British service, they start taking the turret off the vehicles and use them as gun tugs. They could tow a 17-pounder gun, and in some cases as well, they use them as a recce vehicle. They take the top off because it's a fast vehicle with, again, in the back, a twin aero engine or a Cadillac gauge engine, very powerful engine that could speed the tank around very quickly. Now behind the M3 and the M5, we've got a lineup of 3 Sherman tanks and then something called a Hellcat tank destroyer. They're speedy, they're lightly armoured, they've got good firepower for the time, but they weren't really intended for engaging enemy armour. That's the vehicle at the back. That's the M18 Hellcat. The Americans had a philosophy that you can't always have the right type of equipment in the right place at the right time. And they found that some of these Sherman tanks were having to engage enemy vehicles. Early in the war, 75mm, a perfectly good gun for taking on Panzer IIIs and some of the Panzer IVs. It could fire high explosive, it could fire armour piercing. British 2-pounder guns couldn't do that, so we really liked it. But then they tried to upgrade the armour protection on the front of the vehicles, and they upgrade the firepower, which in the second tank, which is the Tank Museum's M4 tank, you can see that it's got a larger gun with a muzzle brake on the end. Now that's opposed to that first Sherman 75mm, but it's a much higher velocity gun. So in other words, the rounds come out the end of that barrel with it can penetrate more armour. And again, it's tungsten, and we could make that Sherman with a 76mm gun could fire what was called half gun on it, thin armour, open top turret, very, very fast. In fact, it's one of the fastest tanks of the Second World War. Whole idea, again, as we were saying there, if you're speedy, the idea was you got to where the enemy tanks were quickly, laid an ambush for them, engaged them with your 70mm gun, and then backed off quickly using your speed to get out of trouble. Again, as I said earlier, it was a good theory, but really it didn't always work in practice. But the Hellcat of all the American tank destroyers, they had the M10 with 3 Army service, they all of them, they did see action in the Second World War, but not always in the way they were originally. Now the Hellcat was John Hewitt, and you can hear that Continental Air-cooled Reagan engine in the back. Basically, it's an aeroplane engine that's making that. Driving around. Again, do be careful what books you read and what documentaries you watch. As a design, tremendously successful. The Americans made just under 50,000 Shermans, and they were supplied to the British forces, the Commonwealth forces. Lots of them were supplied to Russia as well, to help them on the Eastern Front. 1937, he comes up with a rough outline of design. Drives one of these vehicles a great distance, and in the process he catches pneumonia and sadly dies. But his design is taken forward. They have trouble with the gearbox. They have a lot of issues early on in the production, but the tank itself is a sound and simple design, and the whole point behind it is Russian simple mass manufacture will make enough of them. Spitfire in its Normandy invasion stripes. See the Spitfire again, coming from west to east. Moving around. Slightly derated, they call it the Meteor in the tank. Famously, this is the Merlin in the Mark 9 Spitfire. And what you've got there are stripes. And the key thing was it was done very quickly, just so in case we ended up shooting down our own planes, blue on blue situations. We were trying to make sure we identified. And we're very lucky to have them here today. What we try and do is they've got a number of shows they go to, and we can never quite rely on tank. And the crew abandoned the vehicle, and it's the first captured Tiger in the West. I'll let you listen to the engine note as it drives around. We're not going to drive it far, it will be taking part in the battle. So Tiger 131 was inspected by the King in Tunis. Churchill crawled all over it. It was brought back to Britain. And amazingly, one of the people that wrote the report on Tiger 131, which we have in the archive, is a man called Peter Gudgeon, who sadly died a few years ago. He was actually knocked out in the battle against this Tiger tank. And once it had been evaluated, now one of the issues, as you can imagine, we have is tank mileage. We keep the track mileage down on this Tiger, and we run it about 3 times a year. And famously, we also took it up to the Fury movie as our Sherman you might have seen earlier. That was in the Fury movie as well, and it was filmed there. Basically, we have to be honest and say this Tiger tank is not going to run forever, so you're very privileged seeing it here today. And we will try. The Dutch army, they're manning it, and they brought over that rides vehicle, and it's a bit of a comparison to see, because after World War II, German army in the 1950s were reforming the Bundeswehr was very different in concept to the Tiger. The Leopard 1, we saw them. Now, of course, many countries, including the Dutch here, bought the Leopard from Germany. Lots of countries around the world have still got it into service, and lots of them got rid of its Leopards, and the Dutch army as well actually said goodbye to most of its Leopard fleet and sold them, or they were re-upgraded and they were sold on to Finland. Then, of course, the European situation has been changing over the last few years, and countries have now taken tanks back into service. The Dutch army is now leasing. Very grateful for the Dutch guys coming over, as they have done, because they're crewing this vehicle, and they brought over one of these Leopard tanks without the turret on. You may have seen it driving around the arena earlier. So there's an interesting contrast there for you, for the photographers. Tiger 1 and the modern, or much more modern, German tank, Leopard 2. Now we're just going to leave those vehicles there just a short time, just so people can get a photograph. Bit of a rare occurrence seeing those two together. There is now, from spare parts, I say spare parts, battlefield wrecks. One is now being shown at the Panzer Museum in Munster. There's a couple of Tiger 1s, one beside the road at Vernutier in France, in Normandy, battlefield wreck that's now a memorial. Another Tiger 1 at the French Museum in Saumur on the Loire Valley. But at the moment, this is the only Tiger 1 tank that's actually working. But no doubt in the future, other vehicles, replicas, other bits put together from scrap or replica pieces will no doubt be coming together, because there's such a lot of interest, obviously, in Second World War German armour. Maybach engine, don't forget, in the rear, powering through to the front of the vehicles. Unlike most tanks, the only powered wheels on that vehicle are those toothed wheels at the front that bite into the track and pull the tank along it. Torsion bar suspension, so twisted metal bars springing down those wheels, and they're interlinked wheels to spread the weight of that big heavy tank out across the wide track. And again, this particular Tiger, because it was captured in North Africa, it's got the FIFA air filter system on the back.
Here she comes, the Curtiss, Kitty Hawk, the P-40. 29 still in existence around the world. The last Air Force to use this particular type of aircraft was the Brazilian Air Force in 1958. Used as a fighter and latterly as a fighter bomber. It had difficulty at the higher heights and could be outfought by the Messerschmitt. But during the Second World War it was used as a fighter bomber. From Hangar 11, he restores and flies these sort of aircraft at displays up and down the country. And it's a reminder of what we might have seen over this part of Dorset in 1944 as the Allied forces prepared to go ashore at D-Day. A wonderful sounding engine. The P-40 Kitty Hawk. Ladies and gentlemen, the scene is set. Tunisia, 1943. The P-40s coming into action. And all roads lead to the capital, Tunis. Following 8th Army's dogged pursuit of Rommel's forces through Libya and successful following an artillery barrage, German army. Now, ladies and gentlemen, following this artillery bombardment, British armour, supported by infantry, launch an attack on this prepared German position. Using the smoke as cover, the British are taking advantage of the shock effect of the artillery strike to assault the German positions.
Stop.